Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Learn with Jason. I just realized I didn't turn my lights on. Let me set the mood lights. Hold on one second. Beautiful. I love it. All right. It's good to see y'all. I'm rolling solo today. I'm super excited to hang out with you. We're gonna do an app build today. I'm gonna mess around with some new technology. I'm super excited about it. But first, I want to hear about you, chat. How are you? How you been? How's things? How's life? I see you're immediately coming at me with the submarine. Good. I should have expected. I should have known. I'm excited. It's been a while since we've done a solo. I see. Yeah, Nyako. Oh, thank you. Yes, good. I'm glad. I'm really glad to hear that things are going well. But yeah, I'm just having a blast these days. I got to take a vacation. Did y'all have fun with Ben? I thought Ben did a great job. Haven't touched code in 2 weeks. You're great, Nikki. That is excellent. When I took my vacation, like the first couple of days, I kept checking in on stuff, and then I got yelled at, which I really appreciated. Somebody was like, "You're setting a bad example. You need to be on vacation when you're on vacation." And I was like, I say that all the time and I'm not doing it right now. I should do that. And so I followed their advice. I actually disconnected and took some time to be actually on vacation and, hung out on the coast, sat in a hot tub. It was wonderful. Yeah, Ben really did do a great job. I think that would be very, very fun. Hey class, how was the sub? Yeah, it's exactly that. No hot tub time machine, unfortunately. That would have been way more fun. But thank you for the sub, Felix. That is very much appreciated. I'm very much on board. Alexis got to take a vacation. Yes. Yeah, taking that time, being gone. Ben, thank you for being in the chat today. Yeah, what a great day. Okay, all right, so here's what I want to do today. Here's what I'm really excited about. I want to build an app using a new pattern. Well, okay, I'm going to say new pattern, but I'm going to explain why it's not new. And we'll talk about the nuances of this as we get into it a little bit more. But what I want to talk about today is what is called distributed persistent rendering. Okay, it's a big word, sounds like computer science, but I'm really excited about this because one of the things, oh, thank you, Kokasin, for the subscribe. Very much appreciated. So what I'm excited about DPR for, and I'm going to use DPR throughout the rest of today. So if you join late and you hear me say DPR, I'm saying this like people who join late are going to hear me say this part. I don't know what's going on, but yeah. So DPR, distributed persistent rendering, and the reason I'm going to say DPR is because I cannot say distributed persistent rendering over and over again without getting tongue-tied. But DPR is a really interesting model because one of the things that makes the Jamstack powerful, and the Jamstack in general is something that I'm very excited about. I joined Netlify because I believe in the Jamstack architecture. I'm working on a product called enterprisejamstack.com, which I'll send a little linky to about that in case you want to check it out. But so enterprisejamstack.com. It's a thing that I care about a lot. I spend a lot of time thinking about Jamstack. And the reason for that is because I think that it helps simplify mental models. It makes it, thank you all. Oh, Ben is gifting subs all over the place. Thank you all for being here. Make sure you spam the heck out of that boop emote. It's going to be great. Check out all the emotes that are available though. I think we spend a lot of time talking about the boop emote, but there's some good ones in there. So let's talk about the Jamstack a little bit. What I like about it is that it simplifies the mental model. I think that one of the things that gets really hard as you start working on apps at any scale is that the complexity starts to get out of control. You start to end up in this situation where you're building an app, but the thing that you're doing is, thank you for the sub, P dot. The thing that you're doing is you're working on the front end, but your front end has state, it has animations, it has you know, different viewport sizes. It's got to be responsive. It's got to be accessible. All these things that you need to know as a front end developer. That doesn't go away. That's how you build front ends. But as apps get more complex, they start to, now you're thinking about like, okay, how do we deploy this thing? So when you deploy it, you have a server maybe. And if you have a server, then you start to get traffic. And if you get a lot of traffic, then you have to worry about am I getting so much traffic that my server can't handle it? Now you're starting to think about scale. And so you're now, okay, how do I do load balancers, or what about caching and all of these different strategies? It just starts to move you further and further away from being a front-end developer, to the point where, I was at IBM and I was hired as a front-end developer, but my job at IBM included managing a Docker container and the Kubernetes deployment of our front end. I see wait, is Cassidy even here, or is this? Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Chat operating a full boop overload without Cassidy Williams to drive it. Ben, you have ascended. Look at it go. Beautiful. Beautiful. Y'all are doing a great job. Good. Good. We're just burying in boops. But so that complexity is a lot. I, as a developer, I want to be working on the thing that I was hired to do. I'm a front end developer. You're not even going to take me seriously anymore. We're just going to, should I just stand here and just try to get above the boops? I'll try to be up here and be serious. Oh, you're almost crashed it. Yeah. Don't you crash my overlay. Yeah, just standing on my tippy toes so that you can all see me, and try to get the mic to point at my mouth so you can also hear me. But so if we talk about, being a front end developer, I want to get things to production as quickly as I can. And when I get pulled out of my expertise of building front ends and into this, this complexity of dealing with things that aren't my expertise. I'm not a specialist in DevOps. I'm not a backend engineer. I'm not trained in how to scale and keep a server up and running. But because of the complexities of front end and because of the increased demands on us as front end developers, we are seeing ourselves doing more and more of that work out of necessity, or we find ourselves in situations where there is a front end team, and then there's a back end team, and then there's an ops team. And for us to get something live is, days or even weeks to get the change that we made deployed, because it has to go through so many processes and checks. And like, we want that security. We want that confidence that the thing we're deploying is good. But if we remove a lot of that complexity, then we can have that confidence and we can be fast. And that's where I think the Jamstack is exciting, because when you've got a team that's working on the Jamstack, you've removed the need for managing those servers. You've removed the need for dealing with that scale, and you're instead able to build a front end and then deploy it to a CDN, which automatically handles scale. It automatically handles all of those, the caching and the things that you would need for performance. And instead, you can focus on building the best, most accessible, most performant front end. So I like that. When you use an architecture that shrinks your responsibilities without taking away any functionality, you're allowing yourself to move faster with more confidence and reduce risk. And because of the way that the Jamstack is set up, because of that architecture, you get this ability to deploy the thing. And after you've deployed it, if something goes wrong, you can just roll back to the previous version, because each build of the site is its own independent folder. And that is really powerful, Thank you. Oh boy, we got all subs all over the place. Thank you, Kokusin, for gifting those subs. Booping takes brain power. It does take brain power. Yeah, excellent. Thank you all very much. Very, very excited about this. I see you all got some hype train emotes too. Okay, so we've talked about, we've got the Jamstack is removing complexity. It's making it easier for people to work. But now when you go to CDNs, you have static assets. And when you have static assets, you don't have a server, which means that there are certain things that are harder to do. You can do a lot on the client side, but you can't, for example, keep a database connection open. here's our stampede. Oh, good. But so to overcome that problem, then you start looking at serverless. And serverless is great for this because serverless has all the things that I like about the Jamstack. You do the thing that you're there to do. You write some logic, you make a API call, you hit a database, and none of the things you don't want to do. You're not writing server boilerplate. You are not figuring out how to deploy and scale that server. You're not having to set up the routing logic or an API gateway or any of those things that you would need to get a server live. And instead, you just write it, commit it, push it, and it goes live. And I'm talking about the Netlify flow here, where you have your site gets put in Git, you push it. We're going to go through that. I'll talk about that later. So all of that gets us to the point where we want to talk about distributed persistent rendering, because a challenge with serverless is that serverless functions execute every time you call them. And that's not a problem in terms of scaling, because every time you call a serverless function, if they get overloaded, they'll automatically scale. They can handle, millions of hits. The COVID-19 tracking project it was like 2 million API requests overnight. And the only reason they knew was because they hit their analytics, not because there were any issues with the service. And so it's a very powerful model, but because you're making that request every time, it can overload an API. It can get you rate limited. It can add a lot of bandwidth and overhead. And serverless functions are a little bit slower than hitting a fully deployed and horizontally scaled server that's got a load balancer across the globe. So to fix that, that's where distributed persistent rendering comes in. And the idea behind distributed persistent rendering is that you have a serverless function, but if you hit that serverless function, you can cache the result of it and keep it as if it were on the CDN. And this is something that's in kind of early phases. It's in RFC. And you know what I will do is, how about this? Before I talk about that, because I want to show this RFC, I will I'll do the switch over. So let's get over to the solo stream view. And I'm going to do a quick shout out. We have live captioning like we do with every show, and that is available on the homepage of learnwithjason.dev. So if you want to follow along in text format, you can. It is right there on lwj.dev's homepage. That's made possible by Whitecoat Captioning. Thank you so much, Whitecoat, for being here today. And that comes through the support of our sponsors. We've got Netlify, Fauna, Auth0, and Hasura, all kicking in to make the show more accessible to more people, which I very much appreciate. Helps me keep the lights on and keep everything running. So that being said, let's look at this RFC. And let's talk a little bit about, I talked about the challenge. We want to be able to do dynamic things with Jamstack sites. We don't want to lose any capabilities. We just want to remove that complexity. We want to de-risk. We want to get to the point where we can deploy to production multiple times a day without having that stress of having to do 6 jobs. We want to be front-end developers who can deploy on our own to production with safety and speed. So our goal is to overcome that challenge with serverless functions, because if serverless functions run every time, it adds some tricky bits, right? But we don't want to introduce a server, because the problem with a server is that in addition to scaling it, you also start to introduce layers of caching, and layers of caching are hard. There's a joke about, 2 hard things in computer science are caching and naming things. And that joke is valid for a reason. It is extremely hard to get caching right, because if you have a simple layer of caching, you have a file and you cache it, and when that file changes, you invalidate the cache. That is fine. Where it starts to get tricky is when you've got an API, and that API has a caching layer, and you have static assets and those have a caching layer, and then you have a server that's hitting the API and that has a caching layer. Now there's this risk that you run where if you don't invalidate those caches properly, you might end up with a kind of the old version of the API call, but the new version of the server, and that hits the static assets within cache, and those are broken, and then you have to go clear the whole cache all over again. And so there starts to become this complexity. And a way that I think about this is in factorial math. If you have one thing, let's do a factorial calculator, because this is This is like mind-blowing math. So if you have like a one possibility and you do the factorial, which where is it? Can I just like type? So if you do a factorial, which is the exclamation point of 1, it is 1. If I clear that and I do the factorial of 2, it's 2. Okay. If I clear that and I do the factorial of 3, it's 6. Okay. All right. So that escalated kind of quickly. So then if we take the factorial of 4, it's 24. Okay. That's going fast. 5, 120. Ooh, geez. Okay. 6, 720. Holy crap. Now that's a lot of possibilities. And 7, 50, 40. So, you know, like you can see how quickly this gets out of control. Like the number of possibilities is compounding here. And if you get to 9, and there we go. Okay, so 362,000 possible combinations if you get into the factorial of 9. And so when you start adding, like, it is brutally complex to try to manage multiple moving parts. If you get above 2 or 3 moving parts, we lose the ability to hold in our heads. And that is the part that's really, really challenging. Because, you know, if you've got a system that has 10 moving parts, and if you think about a lot of systems, you've got several caching layers, you've got a server, you've got a proxy layer, you've got an API layer, you've got a front end. Like, it's pretty easy for that to get out of control. And this is 3.6 million possibilities of combinations of just 10 moving parts. So the ability for human beings to keep complexity in their head, it is very hard capped at a low number, right? And that is really, really important to keep in mind when you're building systems. If you have a combination of 6 systems and each of those has to be managed individually, our ability to really comprehend how those systems can all fit together is pretty limited. We're not going to be able to do it. If you've got 10 moving parts, you're hosed. There's no way that I'm keeping more than about 7 things in my head at any given time, which if we use 7 as our cap, we've got about 3 moving parts that we can manage, right? That's how many things fit in my mental model, is roughly 3 things before I fall apart as an ability to keep things tracked. And so this is kind of where I have been thinking about this from the Jamstack capacity, because when you do this as an architecture, you've got your front end, and there are a lot of things that move in a front end. So I'm only talking about infrastructure. I'm talking about the way that your front end gets to the internet. And when you introduce a server, you're adding a lot of moving parts, which means that you start adding teams or complexities or checks. And then you start looking at like the DevOps solutions and all the different scalability considerations you have to have in place, and it becomes intractable for a person. Then if you look at moving this to like the Netlify model, where you write your code, you commit it to GitHub, and it goes live, that starts to feel, I can keep that in my head. I don't need a whiteboard to map this out. I can just look at it and say, okay, I know how this works because the front end is here. I know what the build command is. And if the build command succeeds, then we deploy that, right? That's very few moving parts. It's a thing that you can understand. And serverless is the same way. If you write a serverless function, you commit it to GitHub, and it's going to go up and be available at an endpoint. And a serverless function can take input and output. You can track the deployment process for that. It's tractable. You can keep that in your head. When you start talking about wanting to add additional layers of caching, things quickly become intractable. If you are talking about, the output of something being immutable, it's easy to keep in mind because you have a thing, and if you hit that asset, you'll get the same result every time. That's predictable. If you have an asset where I hit a URL and I get different results based on when I hit it, caching starts to become really complicated. If we're doing something where I can hit the thing and then after 5 minutes it'll expire, or after however many minutes it'll expire, that can be really, really challenging. And if what I found is when caching gets challenging, people don't learn it, they learn how to work around it. So an example of this is when I was on a front-end team at IBM, we had really robust caching strategies that were really complex, and everybody just added random number generators to the end of their URLs to intentionally break the cache every time somebody hit it. because we couldn't figure out how to make things invalidate in the right order. So that complexity doesn't lead to people following the rules. That complexity leads to people finding workarounds that break the rules so that they get expected results. And that ends up being very costly, and it's, you know, it's end arounding the system, right? What you tried to do was make things safe, and what you ended up with was the exact opposite of that. Now you've got full chaos, no caching, you're spending a lot of money, your infrastructure spends go through the roof. So when we started looking at serverless, you know, serverless is predictable. You have a server function. When you deploy it, it goes live, and it won't change until you deploy another version of that. But if you introduce caching, there's a possibility for it to go weird. And we've seen this kind of happen in other places in the ecosystem where you've got like timeouts and things like that. And that's all fine. If you know what you're doing and you have a very specific use case and you're willing to accept that complexity, do it. You can do that with serverless functions now. You can return cache headers and TTLs and all the things that you want to do to get the result of a function to cache for a certain amount of time. But when you try to automate that, it starts to get really tricky. There's a lot of pitfalls. And so when we looked at DPR, what the goal was of DPR is to solve that problem by making it so that the way that your build command runs, and if your build command succeeds, it goes to the CDN and it just lives there. That's what we want DPR to be. And that's, you know, the eventual goal of this is for you call a serverless function that's designated as Netlify calls them on-demand builders, uses DPR, which means that the output of that function called with the given path will be stored in the CDN and returned as though it was a static asset generated at build time. And what I really think is exciting about that is that this gives us a possibility. Like let's look at the model here. With a build, right? You run a command and then you get a folder full of assets. With DPR, you run a command and you get a folder full of assets. You can put those on the CDN, and all of these live inside of one atomic deploy. The same set of source code will always produce the same output predictably, always. And that, I think, is very, you know, that's a powerful way to look at this and a powerful way to manage it. So that being said, what is up, Luke? The lolly site that Phil did. Yes. So it's sort of like the lolly site that Phil did, because what Phil was doing was his own sort of version of this, where it was trying to rebuild the site with new data and, you know, kind of do a client-side rendered version. This is making this all programmatic in a way that would be, Jacob, that's absolutely right. My Slack notifications did not stay off. But so if you look at like what we're trying to accomplish, we're trying to get it to the point where you as a developer don't have to think about caching. If you use the Jamstack model, the Jamstack architecture, unless you have an edge case, the caching settings are good enough that you're going to have a super performant site. Assets are going to get delivered quickly. It's very predictable. It's got all the things you want about scalability and all that stuff. We want that same thing to be true about serverless functions for when you have dynamic content. So if I have, say, 1,000 pages on my site, I could use my Google Analytics to determine what the 20% of the pages are that get 80% of the traffic. And I'm going to use the build command to do that. But then I can have a post deploy hook that would call the other 80% of the pages as like serverless functions. I can just kind of set up a loop and send a request to each one of those pages as a on-demand builder. And that would then use distributed precision rendering, get into the CDN. So my build command just drops down to 20% of the time, but I still get a fully statically rendered site, right? So we're able to cut down build times, but we still get that immutable atomic output that is predictable. We're not dealing with caching. We're not thinking about any of that stuff. Or what I want to build today is something where it's more user generated. So what I want to build today is an app that will let you preview a color based on URLs. And so if we're going to do that, I realize I've been talking for 24 minutes. Let's go ahead and do that so we can kind of see how that works. Let's do this. So I'm going to make a directory and we're gonna call this every color. And in every color, I want to be able to, we're gonna run it as a Git directory, and then I'm going to do like the npm init yes to get a package.json. So that just auto puts out, you know, these details. I'll have to go fill out some details because it like missed my author and I haven't configured that properly apparently. And then I want to, let's use node 14. Actually, can we, node 16 is out now, right? So let's install 16. And then, yeah, then let's do node version, and we'll put that into NVM RC so that Netlify uses node 16. That'll be exciting. And then what else do we want to do? What else do we want to do, chat? Let's install the helper function that I need. So I'm going to npm install Netlify functions. And so what I'm using here is I'm working with on-demand builders, and these are going to let us do a whole bunch of stuff. It's very exciting. Do functions cap at node 14? That's going to be hilarious. That's a good question, actually. Let me check that before we do it. You know what? Maybe I shouldn't. Maybe I should just use 14 because I know that 14 works, and then we won't have to do that thing. Let's see. One will override, I think. Yes. Okay. So we'll use node 14. Good call, Eco, to just save me from myself. Yeah, this command here is super handy when you're trying to get Netlify to use a certain node version. And NVM, if you're not familiar with it, will let you just kind of use whatever version of node you want. I love that command. It's super helpy. Super helpful. Helpy. It's helpy. Yes, AWS only supports 14. Good call, y'all. Would have hurt my own feelings that way. Okay, so we've got this thing set up, and what I want to do next is I'm going to just open this thing up, and let's start with, I don't know, let's start with just an index.html maybe. And what I'm going to do with this index.html, I'm going to use the emit autocompletion in VS Code to get me a real simple document. And we're going to say every color. And in this, I'm going to, let's do like a main. I probably want like a header of some sort. What do we want to do here? I can just put like nav, and we'll do a link to home, and we'll call it home. I think that's what screen readers want to see. If I'm wrong, please correct me. And we'll say every color. Then let's add, nope, not in here. Let's get out here. We'll do a main tag. And inside of our main tag, we can put like every color, and we'll get instructions in here on how to do it, but I got to think about how we want to do it a little bit. So let's see what's going to happen here. I'm going to, we'll just do to-do instructions. All right, so let's get that running. And the way that I'm going to get that running is I'm going to run netlify dev. Okay, apparently Netlify CLI got uninstalled when I moved between my node versions, so let's just drop that back in. So I'm using the Netlify CLI for this. It'll be helpy, new word. Hey, what's up, David? How you doing? So let's get this thing installed here. Yeah, Tony, I could mix my environments. I'm not going to do that because I don't really need any of the features in Node 16. I was just reaching for the new shiny, and I don't really need it. So now that I've got that, let's netlify dev. And I'm going to move this over to the right window. There we go. And okay, so now we have this kind of basic setup. Let's make it look nice. So I'm going to create a new file. We'll put this under like assets and styles.css. I'm going to just do plain old CSS. And so let's do something like this. Let's maybe start with like an HTML and a body. We'll give it a system font. We'll do a font size of, let's do 18. It's a little more readable. My eyes appreciate larger font sizes, and that'll also help with like inputs being the right size so we don't get zoom on iOS and stuff like that. Then we'll do I don't know, like a line height of 1.45. That seems right. And what else? What else do we want? Let's do a background color of, oh, this is what I want to do. Let's use variables. So I'm going to set one up of like background, and we will set it to start to be like white, I guess. That'll be fine. And then we can do variable of background. Good. And we'll do a color. Can probably make the text color like, let's do like a darkest color of, I don't know, like 321. And then we can do a text of, we'll do like 543. Maybe. I don't know. That might look terrible. We can play with it. Let's do text, and then we'll have our main, and our main is going to have a background color, but we also want to style up like our H1. And so we'll give that one a color of darkest. Okay, so let's save that and just get a sense of what we've actually done here. So I'm going to link rel style sheet. Whoa, what was that help? Style sheet, and we'll do an href of, let's make it absolute. We'll go assets style CSS, because I think when we take this to like the serverless function, I'm going to redirect everything, and I want to make sure that we include that properly. Okay. So we've reloaded that. I'm happy with that. And let's do a little bit of styling in the browser. So I'm going to pull this over here so that we can do some kind of like mobile-ish styles. I want my main to be, let's go with a like max width of 90 VW. We'll give it a margin of like 5 rem auto. We'll do like a border of 1 pixel solid darkest, and a border radius of, I don't know, like 0.5 rem. And let's give it some padding of 2 rem. Maybe not so much on the top. Yep, okay. Also need to add a little bit more in here. Let's do a style like this. We'll do a margin 0. Yes, I like that. And then let's add another one, and we'll do one of these little jobbies, the lobotomized owl selector, and we'll set a margin top of 1 rem. Good. Okay, and then I'm going to specify that to be under the body so that we don't get it everywhere. Okay, so then now that we've got this, I've got that little bit to clean up in here. Has everybody seen this before? This is very, so basically what this is doing, if you've never seen it, is it's saying everything should have a margin of 0, but anything that comes after a thing should have a margin top of 1. And the outcome is that like this being the first element has no top margin if we inspect it. So there's no top margin, but the P below it does. And you can see that it's got that 1 rem of top margin, and the main has a top margin, but the header does not, because it's the first thing in the body. And the reason I scoped it to body is otherwise the body would have a top margin because it comes after head. So that's that. There we go with the, yes, the lobotomized owl selector. Can you see it? His little lobotomized face is like, he's like, woohoo. But yeah, so this is really handy. Hayden Pickering is the one who popularized this. There's an article on it that you can find if you're interested. Which I guess I can just look it up, right? it is. And we'll include that in the show notes for anybody who wants to see it. See, look at that. Look at that little lobotomized owl. So got that. And then I did some other things that I needed to grab out before I refresh this page, which were styles to the main, which I'm going to grab out here. And let's drop these in here. And I'm going to resist my urge to alphabetize those, mainly because we've got things to do. So good. So if I refresh this page, okay, we're happy. You know what else I didn't do is I didn't set box sizing to border box. And the reason that I do this is if you look, the padding blew this out to full width, but after setting border box, the padding gets factored in and it doesn't do that anymore. So that way things are predictable. The width includes the padding and stuff so that you're a little easier to deal with. You thought I was just making that up. No, I am not just making that up. I am far from clever enough to come up with.
Behold, my bucket.
Yes, indeed, the bucket. And now, so there's a reason that I set this up the way that I set this up. And the reason is I want to be able to modify the background here. So my idea is if we set it like this, we can do like background. Oh, this will be, I need to move this, but we can set the background to like red. And then after I've done that, I'm going to move it up to the right level, which will be the body, because the body is what has the, you gonna let me add this? Hello? No, I can't do it. All right, so let's add it in here. Okay, and what should happen if I did this right, I might have to scope this differently. There it is. Okay, so then we've got our background comes in and works. So let's clean this up a bit. I want my body to be, min height is gonna be 100 VH. So that'll fill the full width of everything. And then, oh, you know what else we can do is we can vertically center our main. So let's, do I want to deal with that? Because we got the header in there. Nah, I don't care. I'm not going to do it. Let's leave it at the top. It'll be fine. So I've got my body. Ooh, that's going to get weird if I do it that way. So I need to instead do body out here because that would have targeted everything, not the body. So I've got my body is going to be a min height, and then I need this to have a background of, let's go with lightest, and we'll make lightest up here white. Oh wait, I already have a background. I'm just going to use the background. No, because I'm going to override the background. Nothing. Everything is fine. There we go. Look at that. Look at it happen, y'all. But yeah, so we have all of that. You can set the root height to 100%. That's cool. Wait, does that actually work? Okay, all right, so bear with me while I do CSS experiments because I'm actually really curious about this. I'm gonna take this out and let's set the root height to 100%.
No, this will work, this will work.
Yes.
I don't see that. Does it need to be like 100? I don't think that one, I might be doing it wrong, but that's, that would be news to me if that worked. So let's instead do one of these. There we go. Okay, so we've got ourselves a thingy. And now what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to set a style, so like hex, and then I want to be able to set a color. So like badass as a color. And when we do that, I want it to come back here and show this color as the background so that we can preview, right? Like I think that'll be really, really fun. So let's figure out how we can make that work. I'm going to add a function. And what we can do now, so we don't even have to configure it, is I'm going to do netlify functions. And inside of this, I'm going to create a new file, and let's call this like color.js. And in here, we're going to do we're going to use that Netlify functions thing. So we want this to be an on-demand builder. So we're going to import builder from, let's see, we're in NodeLand here. So let's require Netlify functions. And what we'll do out here is we'll set up a handler, and that'll be our function. So I'm going to make this async. And then down here, we're going to do exports handler equals builder handler. Right? So this is a slight change from what you would normally do, because like the handler is what you have to export for the function to work. And we are just wrapping it. So I could wrap it, like I could put it up here if I wanted, and that would be totally fine. It's a little cleaner to me to look at it this way. I just understand it a little bit better. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to return a status code, and we'll return 200. That means that it succeeded, and a body. So to start, let's just make sure that this thing works. I'm going to do a status code of OK, or a body of OK. So if I stop this and restart it because we added functions, we should see something change. The first thing is, if you look here, we've got our function server is now running. And again, we're at localhost 888, but nothing has changed there. But if I go to Netlify functions color, it says, okay, all right, so we've got a function running, and it'll live reload and stuff for us. So this should be a color. I can save that and refresh. Okay, so it's all working the way that we want. We can see that the requests are coming in. If I wanted to like console log or something, I could console log here, and if I go out and revisit this page, we can see our console log in there. So our development experience is going to be really nice, and it's worth pointing out that DPR is not happening here. We explicitly don't support that because it would be super confusing if you're trying to develop on your machine and it started caching the results. So so when you're working locally, you'll just see the result of a serverless function, not anything cached. But what this then means is we can start working on our redirects. And so I'm going to, how do we want to do this? Let's do it the simple way. Yeah, let's do a redirects file. And inside of this, I'm going to say everything goes to Netlify functions color, and it gets a 200. But I'm not going to force it because I want my home page to work. And if I forced it, my home page would go through color as well, and I don't want that. So if the page that we're trying to request exists, it'll get served. Otherwise, it'll bounce out to color. It says it reloaded redirect rules. So theoretically speaking, I might not have to stop and restart. Yeah. Okay. So here we go. Now I have been able to request my hex, and it shows up in here, and I can do something like, let's go into our color and get some event data. So I'm going to get the path, and I can just destructure this. That'll be easier. Let's destructure from event, and I'm going to log path. So then when I come out here, okay, we've got our setup. And so then what I can do is I can get more details. So what I want is I'm going to get the array details. So I'm going to skip the first thing because it's going to be empty. And then I want to get the type. And then I want to get the values. And I'm doing it like this for a reason that I will show you just a second. But let's path split based on the forward slashes. Okay. And then let's put in our type and our values. And let's see what happens here. So good, we've got our type, and our values include badass, right? Good. So we can see that we want a hex code and we want badass to exist. But if I wanted to do like RGB, maybe what I would do is like 255, 255, 255. And then when I look, I can see my values as an array, and those are my color values, right? So this will allow me to do this work. Let's see. So what does the wrapper actually do? So under the hood, what the wrapper is doing is it's adding meta details that let Netlify know that it is a builder function. So functionally speaking, it doesn't do a lot other than notifying Netlify that this function should be handled as a builder function. So it's not changing the output or anything like that. It's just including some additional internal details that let Netlify know that this particular thing should be cached. There will probably end up being some config in the future that will allow you to do more. I don't know if we have any of that set now. Yeah, I think at the moment there's no real like config. But we have ideas, and if you have ideas, if there are things you want to see, again, please go weigh in with like, I want to be able to configure this thing or that thing. They are headers, Chris, and they are, but they're like custom Netlify headers that we don't share because they might change at any. They're basically, you know, yeah, they are headers. They're headers, but because it's affecting like proprietary Netlify edge network stuff, it's basically just saying like, edge network, for serverless functions, you're going to return this thing. For things that are flagged as builder functions, they're going to be like routed to the caching mechanism. But yeah, yeah, and yes, the like how we're gonna make this work in Rust and Go and things like that. Like there are active discussions about that. So I have no promises, but definitely something that we're interested in, and definitely something that you know, someone like me is waving my arms about a lot. But yeah, so this is pretty. I mean, already we're in pretty decent shape here. But now what I want to do is I want to figure out how we can get the template, right, of what we're doing here. I want that to be returned, and so I'm going to do it in the most naive way that I can, because I don't want to get into anything particularly gnarly here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a function called getHTML, and I think we'll. I don't like that at all. I'm doing it this way. Naming conventions be damned. And then we're going to figure out what we actually need. But in the meantime, I'm going to return a tag template literal that will give us our HTML. Right? Good. Everybody's happy. This is all what I want. Now, this is the part that we're going to have to calculate here, is we want to change this background to be whatever the color is that came in. But what I can do is I can set some headers, and I want to return content type of text HTML, and the body will be get HTML, and I can send in like type and values, right? So if I send in those type and values, then out here we could do something like I guess we could just dump it for now. We could say the color type is type, and its values are, let's do values join. I think that'll be better. Right, so now that we've got this, we should be able to type is not defined. Oh, I forgot to add the arguments. Whoops, forgot how code works. Hey, value is RGB, and its value, yeah, type is RGB, values are 255, 255, 255. Great. So that's good news. That means that we are pretty dang close here to having this thing work, and we've still got some time. So let's go ahead and build out our ability to determine this color. So let's see, what's the right way to do this? We could do a switch. We could do an if statement. We could handle it a lot of ways. I'm probably just going to do an if statement, but let's figure out. So we want to figure out if type equals hex. We've got one way of handling it. Else if type equals RGB, we're gonna have another way of handling it. What are some other ways that we want to do this? We can probably do type equals HSL. What do you think? What else? What else, chat? So if we do it that way, then we can do like I guess we can set. Oh yeah, old school named color. Else if type equals, let's call it named. I think that's everything, right? An object with those as keys could work. All right, so let's write this and then let's see if we can refactor it. There's probably a better way to do it. So let me start with a let, and we'll call it color value. And if it's hex, I want my color value to be, we'll do this, and then we'll get the first values. I should probably make that a little bit easier. Let's do, let's add a default. So we'll get hex value, and we'll default that to black out of values. So then we can drop that hex value in. And what should happen in that case is if you put in some nonsense, or you like just hit /hex, well, if you put in nonsense, it's going to break because that would be a valid value, and I'm not going to do like value type checking because I don't care. But if you leave it blank, then it'll default to black. If you go to RGB, then we would want to do a const of red. We can just do RGB equals values. And those we can probably default to like 255, because that's, if you do all 255s, that is white for RGB. And then our color value will be RGB, and we'll do the new syntax because we're fancy. RGB. And we could do an alpha, but I won't for now. So we'll do that. And then if it's HSL, we get the same thing. So it'll be const H S L. Oh boy, what are the defaults for HSL? Oh, I've made a mistake. Let's look here. CSS HSL. It is a value, percentage, and a percentage. And let's see. Let's do it this way. And the value is 0 to 360, I believe. 100%, 50%. So we're gonna skip the alpha part, and instead, yeah. So this will be 0. Saturation would be, I don't know, 100, and lightness would be 50. How about that? And that'll come out of values. And then our color value will be HSL, and it'll be H S percent and L percent. And that should give us a good color value. And if our color value is named, then we'll do that, and we'll just set it to black, equals values, and we can set color value to color. Okay, so then what I should be able to do down here is just set that. Okay. Let's see. Unclosed pre-tag. Oh, I did do that. Let's just drop that out. And instead, what we can do is let's test that it works, and then we'll add some visualization. So here we go. What we should see here is a white background. Okay. Then if we go to hex, badass, green, let's do hot pink. Okay, let's do HSL. I don't know what HSL colors are. Let's do 120, 150. That's a very green. And then I think if we do, what is it, like 240 should be green, blue? Yeah, okay. So, all right, so that appears to be working. Our RGB, let's do red. Okay, cool. So it's working, right? It's doing what we want. So let's make this a little bit more visually interesting. So what we'll need is we've got our color value. How can we display this? And we can say type RGB HSL named. Should we give it like a display? And that can just be like hex. But then oh no, we need it up here, don't we? Let display name. I'm starting to see the value in a light refactor here, but we can do RGB, and then we'll drop another one, and we can say HSL, and then with this one we can say named. All right, and then we can say we'll go like display name, color, and then we can do color value, right? And we can drop this in both places. Hey, look at it go. So now we have, ooh, that max width is too high. The max width is too damn high. Let's make this width of like 600, 550. That's okay. That's pretty good. Could it be even, what if it's like a really long one? Like what's the longest one we're gonna get? Probably that, right? Okay, so that wraps, so I'm gonna make it wider. Let's do 570. That seems okay. I'm happy with that. Let's do it. This seems, yeah, I also really like character for max width, but in this particular case, I just want the title to not wrap on me. And I think that's about the longest thing we would get is RGB white, I think. But then we can say, let's add some instructions. Or actually, why don't we do this? Let's show when it was built. Let's get let's see, how is time going to work in Node if I want, because I can't just use like the date module, can I? That would be neat if I could. Let's see, Node get local time. Do I need like day.js or something? Date.now? Oh, you can just use date. Hooray! Great. Let's do that then. Is it like a global built-in, or do I need to date and time? No, I don't want a package. I just want you to tell me. Hello, Node? Node? Whatever. I'm just gonna do it. Let's do const render time equals date.now, and let's drop this in here. I bet I can do this as a string too. That would be extra handy. No. So we'll do it like this. There we go. Okay, that's better. So now we're seeing when it was actually rendered, and it's using, oh God, can I make it an ISO string? That's okay. My brain can process that. Okay. So this is fine. This is good. We're happy about this. We're getting information. It's showing us kind of when things were rendered. We can see that, you know, for local dev, it updates every time we call it, right? And so this will give us a good test of whether or not it's doing what we expect. And then, you know, if I go to like named hot pink, ooh, got to spell it right. Hot pink. Okay. So that does what we want. And then let's also just check really quickly that it does what we want if we like don't give it a thing. RGB goes to white, HSL goes to red. Cool. Okay. I'm happy. And then in this header, I just realized is not what we want to change. What we actually want to change is the title. So that seems right. And now we get, oh wait. Yeah, look at that. Okay, so now we actually get a hex color, and then let's add in the app name. Okay. This seems great. So I'm happy with that. Like, and this is going to be relative to GMT actually, because we're just showing the GMT time zone. And I'm not going to localize it because I don't care. So yeah, the way that this will work, Jacob, is that the fallbacks would cache per path. Like it's the path that caches. So any unique path, like if you came in here, actually, what happens if we just do like nonsense? Undefined color, undefined. So I could probably do like a 404, but I'm not going to stress about it. But anything that you put in here would cache. So this would be whatever thing you want to do, it's going to cache based on that. Query string does not cache. So you can't cache. No, Eco, it's not where the servers are running. It's that the ISO string defaults to GMT. So it's giving us the time at the 0 time zone is what's happening. So yeah, yeah, but we let's see what happens if you have an additional path segment. Will it trigger a new build? Yes. So if we added like a whoops, that would be a new build. And if you keep going, all of these will work, but each of these would be a new build. So, you know, you would potentially want to have like patterns for this and ways of catching it in your URL for a proof of concept like this, where we're kind of taking user input. I'm not super worried about it. And, you know, we're not like evaluating code or anything. So it's just, it should be fine. If there is a way actually that you can do XSS through a CSS variable, that would be fantastic. Prince, hello, bye. Redirects work like this. And if you wanted to do like let's see, like hex value and anything, and then you could go to hex value 200, then that actually that might do what we want. So let's see if I go here. Nope, that didn't work. So I instead, why didn't that work? Oh, I know, because it needs to be a 301. Because we're not masking it anymore. Why did that redirect too many times? 200 to... Is it this? No, okay, so maybe that doesn't do what I want. It's like maybe it's like more stuff. I have to do it that way. Okay, so that works. Aha. Oh, that was what it was. So this will include empty, which is why I was doing a redirect loop. And that actually doesn't matter because it would only be if there was an asset there, so I can leave that. But so by adding one more segment, at least one more segment, we can say always redirect to the right thing, and then I do no more y, please stop, and it's always going to redirect to the right place. And so this would actually work. So we would always be caching at the right thing. Let's see. So Nikki T is asking, would DPR still return cache results if extraneous stuff is added to the URL? Or is there a way to keep returning cache results even with the extra bits in the URL? So do you mean like if somebody were to say like UTM source or whatever? I don't remember exactly how those work, but you know, it's like dev2. Yes, this would still be cached. We disregard query strings. Only the path name. So the path name is the only thing that influences the cache. Is DPR available to everyone right now? Yes, it is. It is on this page here. You can install this this package, the builder at Netlify functions, and then import this builder, and it will work for you. So we're calling it a beta, but it's rolled out. The reason we're calling it a beta is because we're not quite sure how people are going to use it. We think this is a good idea. We have a lot of faith in this approach to unlock a lot of pretty complex use cases. But the reason that we are leaning on the beta and this RFC is that, you know, again, we're really interested in hearing how people are going to use this. Like, what are they going to try to do with it? What happens when you actually try it for a production use case? Yeah. Eco asks if you want to overwrite a DPR file, if it was a blog post and the content changed, can you update it? Right now, you would trigger a new build, and then that would clear that cache. So that is to support the idea of atomic builds of you know, basically making it so that content won't change unless there are builds, so that you can roll between them. And so that is a conscious choice of ours. There is a discussion about what we're tentatively calling like refresh hooks, which is the idea that you could say, I didn't change the code on my site, but content that's being dynamically rendered changed. So just invalidate the dynamic content and copy the files over as a new atomic deploy. That is in discussion so that you maintain that ability to like roll back. So my guess is that we will have a way to do it, but today we don't, because it opens up some doors about like making it difficult to track the state of content. It removes some predictability about how content works between deploys. But yeah, so this is pretty exciting. And now I would like to take this thing live and see how it works. So maybe we should add a little bit of details here about how this thing works. So let's go to our index page and say, we'll say like, you know, preview any color using hex, RGB, HSL, or named CSS colors right in your browser. And then we can do one of these for each one. So hex, use, let's see, like hex and That's not going to do what I want, is it? It's going to need to be like and greater than and less than. And then this is not actually what I wanted. I wanted like code. Writing markdown over here. Code. Okay. And then for RGB, it'll be RGB and 0 to 255. And then we'll just copy paste that 3 times. Okay. Then for HSL, we can do HSL and 0 to 360. I guess, yeah, well, really 0 to whatever you want. It'll just loop around. And then 0 to 100 and 0 to 100. And then named colors. Oh, I typoed that. HSL. Named. Should I add an example? Probably. E.g., let's add a link. So we can do like hex. Right, this seems okay. This seems like it's working. This is what we're doing. Let me close that down though. Why are you double tagging on me? Let's maybe shut the drawer. Shut the front drawer. Okay, so let's get that out of the way. And drop in like an RGB, and we'll do I don't know, a 255, 120, and 200. I don't even know what color that is, but it's going to be fun. Okay. And then let's do one more of those. 2 more of those. I'm going to do an HSL, so let's do a copy. HSL, we'll make it, let's make it just nice, vibrant green. And last but not least, we're going to do a named color. And on this show, we stan John Otander, so we're going to do tomato. Okay. All right, that seems like it'll be okay. Let's go back to the homepage and look. Let's add a break after these. That's a lot otherwise. And instead of EG, we'll do example. Yeah, so now we can click through to one of these and see, ooh, that's a nice color. Oh, I nailed that. Go me. And then we can go through to, yeah, tomato. Good. All right. So I have not styled this thing, but I'm going to be okay with that. Let's, I don't like the way that happened. Let's do like a padding bottom. Actually, let's do this. Let's do a padding of like 2 rem at the top and bottom, and maybe we'll do 0 on left and right. There we go. That's better. Now it looks okay. And then our header, I should style, but I won't. And I'm just gonna leave it. But that's gonna get really inaccessible, isn't it? If I make it like named black. Yeah, you wouldn't be able to see that at all. Okay, so let's style up that header just a little bit, and then we'll deploy. How much time do we have? 15 minutes. We can do it, y'all. So let's get a header in there. We're gonna make this all the same things about. Actually, why don't we just do it like this? Right, and then we can pull some of the specifics out of main. So I do like the padding. I do like the border radius. Do I just want it all? Yeah, so then let's override the margin top here to be like 2 rem. top 2 rem. What am I? Oh. That's a little better. Look at that. Beauty. Beauty. We're winning design awards today, y'all. Okay, so then we can go back here. We can click on any color, get in there. Great. All right, so then let's make that header A, and we're going to do font weight bold and color of inherit, and what else? Let's do text decoration none. I want the color to be darkest. Yeah, right? That seems okay. I'm okay with that. Yeah. Look at this beauty. Look at the, I'm so happy about this. And then I guess we can, yeah, I'll clean that up a little bit more with like a footer and some more details. But for now, I want to deploy this thing. So I've got my basic setup here. I'm going to, let's see, what do we need to ignore our node modules, and what that's about it. So let's echo node modules into a git ignore. And then when we run the git status again, our node modules are gone. So I'm happy to save all of this stuff. So let's git add all. We're happy, good. Git commit, and we're gonna say feature, use DPR to show Jamstack. So we show every color. All right, so then I'm gonna use the GitHub CLI. We're gonna do a GitHub repo create, and I want it to be at learn with JSON, every color. It's gonna be public. Yes. Done. Okay, so then going to git push set the upstream to origin main. That's done. Let's netlify init this thing. I want to create and configure a new site. We're going to put it on my team. We're going to call this every color. That might be taken. Every color LWJ. We don't need a build command. We're going to deploy the current directory, and we're using netlify functions. Okay. So then if I open, this will take us over to the netlify app, where we can see this thing deploying. Here we go, no build command. It's so fast when you don't have any build command, 16 seconds. All right, so then let's go take a look at this thing live. And let's see what we see. So we go to Badass, and it's at 1848.26. Let's refresh. It is not changing as I refresh the page. And that's because we cached it. Now, in the early alpha, one of the reasons this is beta is because this isn't entirely complete the way we want it to be on Netlify. So the way it works now is that this is cached at the CDN nodes, which means depending on where you are in the world, you're going to hit a different CDN node. And depending on which one you hit, it's going to be local to you. And the way that CDN nodes work is that they are least recently used caches. So if your site doesn't get a lot of traffic, this will actually fall off and need to get re-rendered, which that will be fixed. So right now, this doesn't do exactly what we want, the end of the world, like the end of the end state of DPR and on-demand builders is going to be more permanent. It'll go to the cache itself. But for now, it's living on the edge nodes, which is, better than what it was, not as good as we want it to be at the end. So this is really exciting. It's really interesting technology, and as we kind of click around, we can see, all right, so this one just got rendered at 1849, but then if I go back and I look at this one again, it's, did it just re-render already? Well, okay. So, like I said, the caches are, depending on how highly trafficked they are, they will hit more or less often, but, yeah. So right now, Frank, you cannot specify the cache control in an on-demand builder, but that is an intentional choice because managing caches manually tends to be a lot of a foot gun. So if you know what you're doing and you are interested in managing that yourself, you can send back cache control headers. Like you can always send back cache control header here and manage that on your own. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. We don't do that specifically because we don't want it to be confusing. For us, if it's been deployed, it will always return the same thing, and that is very much by design. If content or code changes, you create a new deploy, and that will get you the latest version of the thing. The discussion around refresh hooks, which if you're interested in those, you can add your voice to the RFC, and we can talk about how that would work. Does it give you a cache hit miss header? I don't think it does, but let's look. So here's what we're hitting. Response headers. We get back Netlify. We don't get a hit. It doesn't share that. That is a good idea though. Like that would be a good thing to include. What we can see though is that the request times go significantly down. You know, it's 40 milliseconds to get the page, 42. 40, but if we go to a new one, like we go to, let's say 100, 20, 50, it's 138 and then 41, 41, 41. So, you know, serverless functions are fast, but this gives you an ability to really cut those times down even more. But yeah, so that's an app with distributed persistent rendering and on-demand builders. You know, the Netlify CLI is like, there's a reason that I like this workflow, you know, because if you think about what we did today, I never stopped writing JavaScript. You know, I was writing JavaScript in here. I'm kind of doing basic calculations. Like there's, you know, clearly there are ways that we could have cleaned this up because I feel like this is pretty junky, what I've done here. But, you know, we wrote JavaScript. We were able to use the JavaScript that we know to get values and you know, write some CSS variable overrides and things like that. We didn't have to like go out into ops mode, right? The closest we got to ops mode, we're writing these redirects, which like some config is kind of unavoidable. But what I like is we didn't have to open up another service. We didn't have to write a bunch of extra YAML or provision something to do redirects. We were able to just say, yeah, I want, you know, this route to go to this route and it should be a status code 301. This route goes to this route and it should be a status code 200. Like those sorts of things I think are really more and for me at least, they're significantly more approachable than having to dive into like an Nginx config, because that's just not my, you know, it's not my expertise. It's not the thing that I do. Yes, CSS and YAML. That's not what I want. I don't want to write CSS and YAML. Nikki is asking, is this the feature that Zach Leatherman used to get rid of all those images on 11D docs? Yes, it is. He's now rendering those on demand using the on-demand builders in this pattern. And yeah, so what Landon is saying is he finds this cool because it's not just for full HTML pages, but any asset that can be fetched with a URL. Absolutely. You can use it to render images. You can use it to, like I use it, actually, here's a real world use case. I use it on the Learn with JSON site for the API. So if you go to like episodes on the Learn with JSON site, it's going to bring you back all the episodes. But it does that as an on-demand builder. So API requests stay nice and snappy, and you are able to get all the episodes quickly. That to me is like so useful. I am very much a fan of that. So it took 1 second the first time because I've got to go hit my Sanity API. Second time it takes 40 milliseconds. So it's very, very, very fast to get these once they've been cached. And as this technology matures and that changes from being just the CD and edge node to actually like rolling up to the full atomic cache, it's going to be a really, really powerful way to roll this stuff out. So that being said, any follow-up questions before we start shutting this thing down? Do you redeploy the entire site when you update the episode list in Sanity? I do. But I also rebuild pages for the site when I update my Sanity list. I could potentially do different things to make that less complex. And like if I had refresh hooks, I could potentially eliminate my builds and just kind of, copy the files forward to get atomic builds with the on-demand rendering of like episode pages. That would actually be huge. And it's something that we're talking about how to do it without, like, what we're trying to do is we're trying to avoid that that factorial explosion of possibilities. Farshid, we're talking about on-demand builders. That's what we've been working with today. Let's see. Does a redeploy wipe the whole cache or just the cache of functions with the change? Right now, it wipes the whole cache, and that's again very intentional. We want each deploy to be unique. Now, what Netlify will do under the hood is it will check to see if assets can be pulled forward and not have to be like removed from somebody's browser. But as far as like, there is a folder full of assets that is your deploy, and that each time we're going to make sure that you've got a unique copy of the folder at that state in time. So if like the file hasn't changed, we'll still duplicate it between the two folders, but we will do some smart stuff in the edge network to make sure that you're not like doing a full re-download of an asset that didn't change. Like our CDN is smart enough to solve that. But again, that is something that if you try to do that on your own, it can get hard. Like it can get really challenging. So I definitely, like what we're after here, and the whole motivation is to do solid defaults. We want to make the right thing the easy thing. You as a developer shouldn't have to think about ops. You shouldn't have to think about deployment. You shouldn't have to think about caching strategies. You should be thinking about how to build a front end because that's your job. And when you commit it to GitHub, it should just go live. You shouldn't have to wait 3 weeks to see your changes in production. And when you get this workflow going, it enables that. You can do like light middle tier back-end-ish work to unblock yourself, like standing up a quick API, and you can do all of your front-end work and you're autonomous. And that makes you and your team are more productive. Your company's happier because you don't have these dependencies and things like that. Let's see. Ooh, that's a good idea to do an iCal version. I don't know how to do that, but I would be super open to a PR if you were down for such things. But yeah, so that is a very, very kind of fast, high level overview of DPR. I hope that it's exciting for you and something that you're looking forward to. As always, now that we're out of time, we've been having the whole show live captioned by White Coat Captioning, which is wonderful. It's right on that Learn with Jason homepage. That is made possible by our sponsors. We have Netlify, Fauna, Auth0, and Hasura all kicking in to make this show more accessible to more people. It means a lot to me. I hope it means a lot to you. While you're checking out the homepage, make sure you go and look at the schedule. There is a chance that I'm going to be recording a podcast over my Thursday slot today. So if not, I'll be back on Thursday, but otherwise I will see you next Tuesday, where I'm going to have Gregor Martinez talking about OctaKit. If you haven't used OctaKit, it is dope. It's going to be such a cool episode. A lot of CLI stuff. We're going to be able to build some automations. We've got some really interesting ideas. Thank you for a parting stampede. And then we're going to learn Kotlin. I don't know anything about Kotlin. That episode is going to be chaos. We're going to learn about user-defined functions in Fauna. We're going to do modern Redux. We're going to use TypeScript in serverless functions on Netlify. Better screen reader experiences. I'm also in conversations right now to do even more really good stuff. Like I'm going to drop a couple hints here. We're going to get like Aisha Blake's coming back to the show. We've got Marcy Sutton coming back to the show, and more. So please stay tuned. Make sure you head over to the schedule and add that to your Google Calendar if that's what you use. If you don't use Google Calendar, maybe someday I'll figure out how to add iCal links. But that being said, we're going to go find somebody to raid. Chat, thank you as always for hanging out. We will see you next time.